Hi there, I'm Conor McCreery, the creator of The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Conor McCreery about the last chapter of The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal, published by Boom Studios. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Hailing from Toronto, Ontario, Conor McCreery is a former journalist turned comic scribe. After receiving one too many death threats, he decided to move into the world of comics, and has worked for many of the industry's top publishers including DC, IDW, Boom, Titan, and Dark Horse. He writes about sensitive boys and kick-ass girls, although not always in that order. Previously, he co-created the graphic novel Fela, Music as the Weapon. His current graphic novel is The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal. The story of The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal goes like this. Once taught to fear witches, Saoirse now finds herself becoming one, and must wrestle with what that means for her family, her future, and herself. With the dark witch Nicneven drawing closer to unleashing a world-ending force, Saoirse's struggle to control her emotions, her powers, and her doubts might mean the difference between saving Ireland or losing it forever. Can she ultimately stay true to her heart when everything, including her own magic, urges her to give in to the darkness? So, without further ado, here's my chat with Conor McCreery about the last chapter, The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal, published by Boom Studios. So, Conor McCreery, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, John.
Oh, this is great. It's good to catch up. I know recently we were at some events, but it's good to get online and have a good conversation. So before I get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what are you reading today?
So I have just started because I was recently back in Canada and I was able to see some great Toronto creators. So I have literally just cracked the laser drug force in the Florida hippopotamus cocaine massacre. That is a mouthful. That's Fred Kennedy's
Yep.
new book, which like I said, I've literally just cracked it, so I haven't really gotten very deep in it at all. But it's already such an interesting turn from Dead Romans, which I felt like I've known Fred forever. That was like so much like, oh, I'm like, oh, Dead Romans is the book Fred Kennedy was born to write. But maybe actually the Florida hippopotamus cocaine massacre is the book he was born to write. So yeah, it's I'm just like in love with the art right now. It just seems like such a pulpy, fun, gonzo book, and I'm very excited to see what it's all going to be about. But yeah, so repping the six, Fred Kennedy and that Florida hippopotamus cocaine massacre.
Yeah, it's tearing up the charts, that's for sure. Good stuff. Well, you had mentioned before we started that we were recently at the Toronto Comic Con. I wanted to ask you, how was that event for you, besides meeting up with Fred Kennedy and buying his book?
It was great, actually. It was really good to be back in Toronto. Some people may know I'm actually living in France right now. Have been for about a year and a half. I haven't really done many conventions. And so, yeah, it was just really neat to be back in Toronto to see all the people in conventions. I was doing it with my good friend Jabola Fakbamier, who I think you spoke with him earlier. We were also supporting a book called Fela. And yeah, it was just really cool to be there. That spring show, it's funny, I haven't done it as much as the big one. And now I think I've come to realize I might like it even better. It's just, there's a little more space, a little more time to chat with people, a little more time to walk down the rows and see people like Fred and, the Becca and so many other really neat, we were right beside Derek. There's so many really neat people that I got to chat to. And so, yeah, it was a really fun convention.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good local Toronto folks were there and lots of good meetings, and that's for sure. And it was a great time to meet up with you, that's for sure. So we're here talking about your latest graphic novel, The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal, published by Boom Studios. I wonder if you could talk about the story a wee bit without giving too much away. What's the story all about with this book?
Sure. So The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal is the second part of the Last Witch saga. The first one, Fear and Fire, came out actually a couple of years ago, kind of during COVID. So it's been a while. The Last Witch is basically about a 12-year-old girl named Saoirse who discovers that she can use magic after a coven of witches destroys her village and it leaves just her, this bratty little brother of hers, and her cigar smoking grandmother to help Saoirse learn these four elemental magics to keep that coven of witches that destroyed her village from opening a door that could destroy the world. So think of it a little bit like Irish Avatar: The Last Airbender, except if Avatar: The Last Airbender had just the right amount of child cannibalism.
Oh my goodness. Just a little bit. There you go. Well,
Just the right amount, just a smidgen, right? Because I mean,
yeah.
if no children are eaten in a book about witches, how do you know witches are even involved?
Mhm.
It's a little bit like say The Secret of Nim or The Dark Crystal, to use references from my childhood, or classic Brothers Grimm fairy
Right.
tales.
Hmm.
In that, it's a little dark. There are moments where, a younger reader might think, oh man, is this all going to work out okay? But like those movies, like the fairy tales, ultimately the book is perfectly okay for all ages. But, I want to rate the kind of book that my kids would start to get a little nervous at bedtime. The bedclothes start coming up over the nose towards the eyes, and you stop and you say, like, oh, is everything okay? Do you want, should I stop reading? No, down go the bedclothes. So that was my goal, because those stories were the ones that stuck with me because they were more intense and a little scarier than the other stories I was reading. And, even though at the end, there was nothing in the books that ultimately, I never wanted to turn off those movies or finish, reading those stories. I was hooked because of the fact it was just a little darker and a little scarier than most.
Right. Safety not guaranteed.
Yes, exactly. Great
So you're
movie.
working again with V Glass, your
Yes.
collaborator doing illustrations. Can you talk about the creative process? Was there any variation in putting this book together, or you guys said, this is it, we're doing the same thing we did before, and away we go?
Yeah, I would say like the main process was pretty similar, right? V and I think, had a really good groove. They're such a talented artist. They really do a wonderful job of reading of reading my scripts and figuring out what actually should be in the book as opposed to what it sometimes is on the page. So I think we had a really good rhythm with that. I think the strange thing about this book was just that V actually drew it without knowing if the book was actually going to come out. We had a brief period, well, actually it wasn't brief, it was literally a couple of years, where after book one, because of COVID and everything else, Boom, who's the publisher, I kind of just put the book on pause. They just weren't quite sure what to do next because, they had such a backlog, like so many publishers did. And V and Natalia Nesterenko, the colorist, I'd said to them, I want to finish this book. It's so important to me. It really matters a lot to me because it's, I'm Irish descent, and it's about Irish fairy tales. And, I just love this story. And I knew what the story was. And they basically just told me, like, send us the pages and we'll draw it. And we'll figure out everything else later. We'll figure out getting paid. We'll figure out where it's going to be published. But they were such supporters of the book that they jumped into doing book two without knowing where the money was going to come from and how we're going to get this thing out to the audience. And then, happily in the fullness of events, chatting with Boom, there was sort of a, hey, what do did you ever do anything with the rest of that Last Witch? And all of a sudden we were ramping up and taking all these pages we'd drawn and getting it out to the letterer and getting it out to the readers.
That's great. That's commitment to the reader for sure, and to you as well. Great support. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, again, the comics community is so amazing.
Yeah. Well, I've read that this is the last chapter, the conclusion of the Last Witch story. Is that true, or is someone pulling my leg?
I mean, this is the finale of this first adventure. This is the story of Saoirse finding out what her potential is, battling this coven of witches, and then also, a little bit battling the corroding effect of magic. Because, in the last world, the last witch, magic itself is not for humans. And that's why we have these stories of these evil, monstrous women who become witches. They don't start that way, but the magic, it eats away at them. So this will be that story. I know what I would do if there was going to be another book in the Last Witch series, but right now, we haven't talked about that with Boom. I know V's about to jump onto a really cool new project. So, if there would be another book in the Last Witch, it might be sometime down the road. Although, given the break between book one and book two, maybe we're just keeping a schedule of a sort, doing it that way.
Well, never say never. Yeah. Now, you
Exactly.
mentioned the Last Witch story is built upon your Irish heritage, the folklore. I wonder if you've been exploring other countries' folklore, perhaps as inspiration for your future graphic novels.
I mean, I love fairy tales and folklore from around the world. I'm kind of a sucker for those stories. So I was kind of diving in Yoruba folklore. That's one of the communities in Nigeria, the Yoruba people. That was actually for a graphic novel called Fela, Music is the Weapon, where we kind of used some of the mythology of Nigeria to inform the life and times of this legendary musician activist, Fela Kuti. But the creator of that book, Chibola Fagbamie, and I, we have a couple of other ideas that also would be sort of set in the history of Nigeria, one of them, so and which would also kind of play with the mythology of Nigeria. And then another book that's more of an all ages one that is more of a straight, getting sucked into the spirit world and and then going on adventures in there. So there's the one we kind of think is like the Nigerian version of Blue-Eyed Samurai a little bit. If you know anything about Nigerian culture, or if you've watched Black Panther, you know about the all-women guard that Black Panther has, and that's based on a real life all-female military unit that was feared all across Africa and in Europe during sort of the early days of colonialism. So we're that would be our hero for that book. So we are looking and kicking around some ideas from the past and from mythology.
Would you recommend for up and coming creators to look at this as perhaps a source? I mean, sometimes it's like, where do you get your ideas from? But there's tons of stories and folklore. Like you mentioned the Brothers Grimm before. I mean, that's a platform that anyone can jump off of and revitalize or modernize, that type of thing. Is that something you recommend?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you should follow your interests, right? And I think, whatever it is you actually love, that's the stuff that will, I think, inform your best storytelling. Some people have such like a broad breadth of things that interest them. And, those are the creators who are doing, maybe Fred Kennedy, right? Going back to Fred, like Dead Romans, because, I've known Fred for a long time. He loves Roman military history. But obviously, and I haven't spoken to him about this, but there's obviously a whole other branch of his interests that informed, cocaine hippos. So I really recommend, I think people should follow what they're interested in, but I don't think you can ever lose, especially reading stuff like Brothers Grimm, their short stories. It's a really easy way to just expose yourself potentially to a whole different style of storytelling. And, who's to say that your amazing, gritty, noir crime novel couldn't somehow be influenced by the Brothers Grimm? Maybe it's some sort of noir crime version of, the Big Bad Wolf. I don't know, but I think that's where the exciting ideas come from.
Right. We've been talking about The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal. I got to ask you then, what's next for you? Do you have any other projects on the go that you can talk about?
So the next project that will come out for me is going to be a book through Scholastic called Status that I actually wrote with my wife. It's an all ages book about basically about what happens when you go from being a big fish in a small pond to moving to a big town and suddenly feeling lost and not sure who you are. And you're not the kid who's happy with just fading into the background. You still want to be that star that you were in your small town. What kind of choices do you make? What kind of mistakes do you make? So it's a little bit more of a slice of life, all ages book. That's the only project that I can sort of, that's officially on its way. I'm also working on sort of a futuristic noir that was very much inspired by San Junipero, the Black Mirror episode, and also the Black Mirror comic book, which I know there's a publisher putting out a Black Mirror comic book based on San Junipero right now. Those would be the things I'm probably most in depth working on. But, there's always pitches getting ready to go out.
Yeah, lots down the road, I'm sure that you can't talk about, but all in good time, I suppose. That's for sure.
Yes.
Now, we've been talking about Toronto Comic Con at the outset. Wondering, do you have any other events or festivals planned for this year?
I'm going to be at the London MCM show. So that's the UK. That's in sort of mid-May. Then I'm going to be back in North America. I'll be at the Philly Fan Expo at the end of May, and then at the Toronto Comics Arts Festival at the beginning of June. For any listeners who might be in the educational world, I'll be at the Chicago ALA meeting in Chicago, which is actually a really interesting place to meet people who are writing books and doing comics, where all the librarians go. It's pretty cool to see how they talk about how important books and comics are, especially with everything that's going on in the States right now. In the fall, I'll be at the Lakes Fest in the UK, and a couple more that I can't announce yet.
What sort of difference do you see being, on either side of the pond when it comes to conventions? Is there a difference when you're going to, let's say, a show in London versus a show in North America?
I mean, I would say, I think the UK shows, I mean, I've really only done MCM, and I've done a couple of some other smaller shows. I would say when I first started doing these shows, say like 10 years ago, that the UK shows were Like maybe a bit of a copy of the US Canada style. I think now they've really started to evolve and have their own flavor. They're still very, I think if you went to a show in the UK, you're not going to be like, what the heck is this? I mean, it is very familiar. A lot of the same type of things are going on. But it also, I think you're increasingly seeing more and more of the UK comic scene burbling up. And hopefully this year I'll get a chance to do a couple shows in France. And I've never been to Angoulême yet, but I've heard that is an absolute bucket list opportunity, and that the way they look at graphic novels, and from the way I've spoken, especially to artists, being just a writer, it's a bit of a different thing, but the way artists interact in those shows is incredible from everything I've heard.
Nice. Well, with everything that you have on the go today and in the future, where do you recommend people go online to find out what you're doing?
I mean, the best place to find me is on Instagram. I am the real Connor. I am still in the long protracted process of getting my website built. That will be connorwrites.com. But right now, Instagram is the best place to find me. I do a little bit of stuff on X and on Blue Sky, but Instagram is probably my main way of going through. You can also find me on the Fela graphic novel website. And, if you're looking for The Last Switch, Blood and Betrayal, that's a book that you can find at your local comic shops. It just came out, or if you use online retailers, you'll be able to get it through there as well. Of course, and as a reminder, that's the second book. So if you haven't read book one, Fear and Fire, you want to get that one first.
Super. Well, Connor, those are all the questions I have for you. But I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
No, I don't think so, John. I mean, you're always so thorough. You always ask so many really good questions. Yeah, I don't really think there's anything that I'm dying to say except read more books.
Thanks to Connor for the chat. You can discover more about Conor McCreery on Instagram at TheRealConnor. And you can discover more about The Last Witch, Blood and Betrayal at Boom Studios. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media platforms, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.